I mean, when it came on the first time, I was like, why is nobody going off? I was going off in my head. You said, I'll keep it contained.
Go up, Texas, I think.
We must be aging ourselves.
Just like 2 minutes. Yeah. This is like your warm up. Beep beep, who got the keys to the Jeep? Brought it down and gonna go like up.
Everybody in there. Oh my gosh, I missed this song. That was a whole
Thank you all for joining us. So, thank you so much. Just want to thank Alexander Wahelie for wonderful invitation. All protocol observed. Anybody from Brown, we thank you for organizing this, the technical crew as well. Everybody who has provided us with food and everything. Thank you so much. This is going to be a panel between Alana Fields, Clifford Prince King, and Ajamu X. And it is specifically about photographic archives and imaginative possibility. Focusing on the fraught intersections of Black queer representation, as well as the concurrent violence and imaginative possibility of Black queer photographic archives. That's what we have in our program. So, breaking the tradition, I want us all to kind of give a very personal introduction. So I'll start with myself. My name is Selubidi Moses. I'm from Uganda originally. I was born there in the 80s. Obviously, I love Missy Elliott, who is a huge idol of my childhood, my Black queer icon, say. Was mentored by B.C. Silva, as was Antoine Bird. I am becoming and evolving and continuing to be an art historian who is, I think, really pushing against and challenging really what that discipline, I think, was meant to do initially. So with of course, with many colleagues of mine who are in the field. And yeah, I'm happy to be here. So anybody else?
Hi, I'm Clifford. I'm from Tucson, Arizona. I live in Brooklyn now. I'm a self-taught photographer, filmmaker. My practice is kind of a lot about just being present with people who I have in my life, and it's a lot about exploring and finding time to slow down, and yeah, a lot of discovery happens. Yeah.
I'm Alana Fields, originally from DC, Maryland area, where I currently teach at Howard University. Spent some time in New York as well. I would say over the past 7 years, I've been working really intentionally with Black queer archives, specifically imagery from the early 20th century. I'll say a little bit more deeper about that as we kind of go along. But I'm really interested in notions of invisibility and visibility existing in the same space. Ways to kind of perform archival excavation through bringing images from the past into the future, into the present, contextualizing them in ways that kind of honor our history as Black queer people, the things that we've experienced, the erasures that we've experienced, but also the triumphs. So yeah, I think we can kind of rest there with it. Yeah.
I'm a Jamu X. I was born and raised in a small northern town in the north of England, and my parents came from Jamaica, and my grandparents came to the UK in the late 50s. I'm an archivist. I co-founded the Ruckus Black LGBTQ archive that I will talk about later. A lot of my work is around how we think about pleasure and sensuousness. I question how I see a Black queer photographic practice being engaged with, and that part of the work is around the archive, is around how do you archive Black experiences, and I'm simultaneously questioning the role of the archive at the same time. So a lot of my work sits within that friction, or let's say, a kind of frottage into how these things rub up against each other. So I come from I think a playful, kind of mischievous, kind of post-punk kind of politic, yeah. And the work I'm draws from the experiential, and then for me, then it's the experiential that creates the philosophy around the work. So I'm using philosophy purposely because actually there's these ideas that I'm always grappling with, yeah? And those ideas are not about finding answers, but still trying to ask other kinds of questions. So hence, that's the space that I play in, and then I also use play very purposely, because then the kind of playing I'm talking about is no less serious. And that's the space that I kind of live in.
Yeah, I thought we could kind of deal with this question of archives, which I think the symposium has already tried to massage out. I'm looking at you, Ade. You kind of talked about that in your panel as well. But yeah, I just wonder how we just get into this question for ourselves. Like, at what point? I mean, Ajami, you've already kind of started to, just in your introduction, how you approach archives. So have you, Alana. I just wonder if we could say more about that. Clifford, do you want to start?
About how I archive?
Yeah. Or like just what does this word archive kind of mean to you? How do you think about it?
Well, I mean, I grew up, my dad had a VHS camcorder, like the really big ones that you have on your shoulder. And I remember like him almost throwing it away, and I was like, no, I want it. So then I took it, and then I started recording my room and like like this like little interior design quests that I had as a kid, like painting my wall or moving things around. And I would just watch them like back later and like make edits to them and would like take the tape out and then record music videos like in between. It was just really cool to manipulate something and to have something that I created that would kind of last as long as I took care of it or like kept up with it, like a collection. Because I never was into like Pokemon or like, that was just like what I collected was like tapes and photos, disposables, and like figurines sometimes. So that's like kind of how I first got into archive. And then fast forward, you know, I would take a lot of photos of friends just out on a hike, just doing a lot of nothing. And I remember getting my negatives back from shooting like 35 millimeter. And I would just kind of throw them in this box. And then I moved to Portland, Oregon after high school. And after a while, I just like had this huge box of negatives and I was like, this is crazy. And so I started organizing them and like labeling them. And that was kind of like, I'm glad I did that, you know, but there are a lot of images that I've lost because I didn't do that. So that's kind of what first comes to mind when I think about archiving and, you know, and I mean, that's aside from, that's like the more physical aspect of it, but I think there's a lot more to be said about like what it means and the importance of it and how it's like it's a serious thing, but also it just feels very like personal in a lot of ways too, like family history, etc. Yeah.
Yeah, that resonates with me. I guess it was about 2 years ago that I kind of dawned on or had this epiphany of like, you know, how did I land here? You know, archiving, building an archive, working with archival material. And it started really young. Obviously, I didn't have a language or understanding of what I was doing. You know, I thought I was just looking through family photo albums from a place of curiosity, a way of trying to know or understand my family history or family members who had passed on who I didn't get a chance to meet, encounter, live with, you know, ask questions. My grandmother, my maternal grandmother, passed away in 2014. And something that's been sitting with me since then is like, wow, I didn't ask enough questions. And it's not that I didn't have them, but I think in a lot of ways I didn't feel confident to ask those questions. And so that's kind of like a roundabout way of saying how I got here, but I think I was always curious about photographs, always curious about the past. I found myself to be a bit of a nostalgic person, someone who is much more interested in the past than in the present, or more so how the past kind of informs the present. So fast forward to 2019, my archiving specifically with Black queer archives began out of a void that I was able to kind of surmise. I was in my MFA program at Pratt. I had taken a break from, you know, a conventional way of making pictures. And I was thinking about my coming of age as a young queer person, being the only out queer person in my family, despite other queer people being legible to me in my family, especially elders, right? And in a lot of ways, we look to our elders to kind of roadmap for us, you know, how we'll move forward, how we'll understand ourselves. And in the absence of that, I began to think about, well, what were the images that I saw of Black queer people, specifically Black queer women, who existed in a space of, masculinity and femininity and being able to embody both of those things. And I came up with nada. I couldn't really remember any images that I saw that made me feel like I saw myself in someone else. And so I did this deep dive in, public archives at institutions to see if I could find early images of Black queer people that predated the 80s, that weren't really about, social issues that we were navigating, as queer people, but more so the everyday life. What did we look like in our home spaces? How do we adorn ourselves? What do we look like in, with lovers in those intimate home spaces? And I couldn't find anything. And from that place of void, I, went on this journey that I didn't really realize would be this long and ongoing, of trying to excavate those images that I could not find. Going on this kind of ancestral archaeological pursuit of bringing the past forward so that I could make visible the images that I didn't see coming up, and to be able to provide that back to my community. And so I think archiving for me is both a pursuit of curiosity, but also a way to kind of correct history, to fill in those gaps, to debunk things that I myself was told about how my life would be as a queer person, and to show through images, what we're experiencing now is not new, and, there are queer people, the earliest image I have is a daguerreotype of a couple, two men, lovers, very early 19th century. And that image sits with me. I look at it a lot just to kind of remind myself, that nothing is new. And even back then, we were able to exist, to go to a photo studio, to sit, to have our photograph taken, to walk around with that at a time where it's dangerous, where it could mean exposure, right? Where it could mean violence. And I think that's been kind of like the jumping off point for the work. And over time, it has continued to be that and became other things as well. But yeah, that's kind of my relationship to it, past and present. Yeah.
I have these fond memories as a young kid. Me and my family would have our photograph taken, and then those photographs would then be sent back to family back in Jamaica, and the photographer would come back about 2 weeks later, but it felt like weeks, yeah? And there was something about him coming back with this piece of paper, it was paper, called a photograph, yeah? So that's then one of my early memories of the photograph, just doing these family portraits, yeah?
Sure.
And the photographer was called Mr. Chin, right, yeah, who did weddings, funerals, christening, yeah? And fast forward, I'm during the kind of the 80s, a lot of the images of gay men were always white gay men, and very feminine and very asexual. A lot of the images of black men were kind of your gangster and your pimps. So basically, I then couldn't relate to those two images of black men. And so basically, I'm a punk. I'm living on a working class estate. I'm dealing with black working class homophobia, white working class racism. And so I am walking around with my mascara, nail varnish, all that kind of stuff, right? Punk goth. I'm kind of in that kind of space. And the only space that I saw I'm black men with black men were in African American pornographic magazines. And then they affirmed what I was feeling and thinking, and also at the same time, the language around that work was racist. So hence, I'm dealing with these black men I find attractive, and at the same time, I'm dealing with this racist language. And so then, from there, I would photograph men, friends around the town that I was attracted to, right? Yeah, I still have these out of focus, soft negatives, images of black men that I was attracted to. And so basically, I was grappling with this idea of blackness, yeah, and gender, because the town had very fixed ideas, and then I wasn't that, yeah. So that's how I kind of started off. But I wouldn't say that I was an archivist, yeah. Fast forward, I then moved to London, and then I'm documenting. I'm Black Queers at Pride and events, and so on. Basically, I have this large archive from the late 80s, and then each time I've travelled, I've documented. But once again, I wouldn't say that I was an archivist. I was just taking pictures of friends, lovers, people that I've met along the way. And then I co-founded Ruckus Federation in 2000, along with my best friend Topher Campbell. And then by 2005, we created this exhibition called The Queen's Jewels, yeah? And the word queen as I'm always being used as a slur against men who are always femme, right, yeah? And then Queen's Jewels also refers to the private parts, yeah? And then ruckus, I come from the word raucous, trying to create a fuss and a noise. And then ruckus was also a rhyme, African American porn star from Black Inches, yeah? So then some of the archive then came out of that moment, but the archive also comes out of the work of Stephen G. Forward, who is central to my thinking around the archive at that particular moment, yeah? And so now, in 2005, your Black social and cultural history rarely included around LGBTQ experience. And then your wider white LGBTQ rarely included around Black experience. And then the times then Black queers then appeared in terms of the national narrative, right, yeah, it was these reductive ideas around blackness and queerness, yeah? And your Black bodies were then always framed around the problematics of their sexuality in terms of the Black church community. And they were always in relationships with white men, yeah? And those white men was always out, proud and confident, yeah? So then Ruckus then comes out of this, and this moment of trying to have a different conversation around a Black queer experience that didn't start from a place of lack or deficit. And so basically, yes, there's racism, yes, there's homophobia, and there's transphobia, and at the same time, Black queers was always creating culture. So when the archive then comes out of that leg around aspirations, celebrations, into who we are and what we are, in the context of the UK and first generation, yeah? And that is really key, isn't because a lot of the work around the archive or Black experiences was still coming from a North American experience, yeah? So basically, as then someone who was then born and raised in the UK, culturally, I'm Jamaican, but politically, it was looking towards the North American experience.
Right. Yeah.
So then that's the space that I then found myself in, and then that's when I then started to then use the word archivist. It's because now I have something to name it properly, yeah, and and the archive covers roughly a 50-plus year time frame. So it's magazines, books, journals, flyers, posters, love letters, pornography, and the archive kind of operates in two levels. There is those things, and from my folks who are out and then creating work, and then we've also got things for people who are then might not be out publicly. It's because then there's like common knowledge and public knowledge, and so we still keep some of that stuff because, and we have new who those pop stars were jumping around on TV and so on and so forth. So when the archive then comes out of that kind of moment, and then for me then over the years I've then been critiquing the very work that I've been creating as well. Because basically I think that lots of the work around the archive is I'm locked into kind of a rights-based kind of narrative, yeah? It's still locked into the social and cultural, and then I will kind of expand upon this bit later. And for me then, it's because pleasure is central to my work and practice, right, yeah? I'm talking about archival pleasure, because then there's something that the archive is doing outside of structures and institutions. Because I'm from the school, when I touched that flyer from the first National Black Gay Men's Conference in 1987, it also touches me back. And that means then there's this intimacy around the archive. So then my archival work then goes, yes, I am going to collect and preserve, and then still at the same time just undo the archive. So then once again, either move between the archive, not just a space or a place, but it's a conceptual archive as well. And then I will share later what I actually think the archive is, or where I think it can now go to. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you, Ajamu, and thank you, Alana. But I want to come back to Clifford, and I think I wanted you to respond, actually, to Ajamu, but specifically more from this perspective of pleasure. I think your work deals a lot with that, and I wonder how this question of intimacy and pleasure intersects with your need to document, like people who you know, or places that you feel a strong intimacy correlation with.
Well, I guess with my work, for the last, 6 or 7 years, I've tried to just create images that felt very romantic and almost kind of daydream-like, because I'm kind of a person who likes to kind of stare or look for a really long time, and I'll kind of drift into these fantasy states where I'll be outside and I'll look at something and I'm like, oh, well, what if these two men just were holding this basket of fruit together and walking out of the store instead of this straight couple. It would kind of just get lost in the idea of seeing queerness more present and more available and more beautified versus in the past. I see queerness in Black Inches, which is a pornographic magazine that's mostly white photographers, and the subjects may have gotten paid very little, and they're just doing whatever, just to kind of create this archive of images that felt kind of an end goal, or how I'd want my life to result as. in a relationship or just in a place where there's comfort and stability, you know, seeing queer folks in stable, flourishing homes and environments versus like in clubs, and which is like that's great as well. But I think just in like Googling like gay black men, maybe in like 2010, you know, the references would be, you know, AIDS or just like violence or nothing. And so I kind of just wanted to make images that I could look up to, and you know, things that would happen behind closed doors, but kind of amplify them in a way where it was inviting. And yeah, I don't know if I answered, but I
Yeah,
just,
of course.
yeah.
Yeah, did you want to say more?
I don't think so right now, yeah.
Well, Alana, I think I just want to come back to you because I think you're really interested in this intimacy with people who have departed, which is, I mean, I don't want to over theorize the question of intimacy. I think, Ajahn, you've done plenty of that already. But I think intimacy, also signifies an absence of, you know, we desire because there is something we don't have in us that we want to consume. Therefore, it replaces the emptiness that we have inside. So how do you deal with that with people who have departed? I mean, the idea that you are consciously making an archive of people who are no longer here.
Yeah. I guess I'm thinking about it in a way of resurrection, of trying to honor not only the people pictured, but perhaps, you know, their intentionality behind being photographed and having this printed, thinking about the circulation of images in the past versus the circulation of images now. It's a few people within my archive that I've received, or I've collected multiple different photographs of them over time, specifically through eBay, but they came from different sellers who don't know much or anything at all about those pictured, and really are not invested in knowing, right? And so that has me thinking about, you know, how did these photographs of this person end up kind of sprawled throughout the country in the hands of people who have no connection to them? And I'm just thinking about, you know, how that happens. When people pass on, depending on their relationship and dynamics with their families, if they were accepting of them, you know, what happens to these photographs, right? How were they cared for? How were they discarded? And so in a lot of ways, it's trying to bring this memory back together, trying to reunite these photographs, you know, in a way that feels intentional, and to bring it into view in a new way. Clifford, what you said about wanting to make pictures that were in a way kind of aspirational for how you would like to see your life, or how you would like to see your life documented. I find myself thinking and feeling those same things. You know, what would my life have looked like, you know, if, you know, I was born 20, 30 years earlier? You know, what pictures would I have taken? How would I have looked? Who would my lovers have been? You know, where would I have lived? how would I have documented my life? And so a lot of dealing with, I guess, the dead, the ancestors is memory work, right? And working with memories that are not necessarily lived by me, but kind of collective memories that we all share. Yeah, yeah, it's deeply memory work for me, and focusing on recollection, and what does it mean to sit in front of an image from the 1960s of someone who you don't know but you see yourself in. A lot of my work predominantly has male subjects, which is not completely intentional, but kind of reflects gaps in the Black queer archive, and how Black queer women, specifically femmes, experience some erasure within the archive from having their queerness not being legible. And so in a lot of ways, my archive of work, the physical artwork that I make, definitely has women pictured, right? But I also want my work to reflect the gaps in the ways that, Black queer women have had to work in different ways to be seen within a community that does not always prioritize preserving their memory, especially photographically. So, yeah, I feel like I kind of, went through a maze with that one. But yeah, I think in working with those who have passed on, I'm trying to reach back a bit, have a call and response kind of relationship to the photographs, and trying to meditate on what they might want to be. So much of that is speculation, right? So much of that is me projecting my own experiences or non-experiences on it, but also trying to kind of surrender to what I'm feeling and what I am hearing. Yeah, and trying to bring that forward in the work.
I think sometimes when I'm making work, I'm like aware that it'll be a memory, and so it makes me excited for me to. That's why I think in like traditional photography courses, there's critique, which is, I guess, a separate thing. But whenever I sit in on a critique, I'm always kind of like, it's just interesting to me that we're critiquing this work that the students are working on this week. I'm like, why don't we give it like a few years to like marinate a little bit? Like, why don't we just encourage the work to just progress, or to get crazier, or to get more wild, or take away something or add something? Why are we breaking it down so quickly? So like whenever I'm making something, or there's just something really freeing in knowing that whatever it is that's being done is going to be like a memory that's kind of cherished regardless of the outcome. And so you can kind of just keep pushing forward, like, despite criticism.
Yeah.
Because the people you're photographing are like people you care about, or like you're not going to not want to see this picture of your homie that lived across the hall, if it's in a museum or not. Like,
Right.
You're just happy to have it because that person's not going to either, where time's going to pass, etc. So I think about that a lot. And
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah. I was wanting to maybe go back to Ajamo a little bit, just because I think maybe, and just to bring you away from the theory, I want to bring you into the practice. And when you said, well, I'm just photographing my friends, I didn't know that this would become an archive. Pretty much the situation that Clifford is in. And actually, Clifford hopes that it will become an archive, right? Like, or is projecting into a sort of future. But how could you take us back to those days when you were actually in that space of not being aware that your work would actually become an archive?
I think the archive is a process, right? Yeah. And so for me, it's around naming oneself as at various points of one's identity. So naturally, and there was a point that I would not call myself queer, yeah, but now I would, and then that's the same for this thing called the archive.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So then, once again, I think that black queers have always documented their lived experiences, photography, music, film, whatever. But then they might not say, I am an archivist. And I think I'm always mindful around how particular words get put onto particular kinds of work that might make it become something else. That's why I'm saying at one point, I have no idea what an archivist, an archivist, let alone an archive. But we have things in the house. Right, yeah.
So-
but now, fast forward, I have something to lock it into.
But
Yeah.
I want to bring you back because I think you also mentioned the family photograph,
Yes.
you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
and I want to sort of go back to that moment because I think that the family photograph is an archive. Like, the family portrait is so central actually to the idea, in some ways, of what all of you are kind of producing.
I totally agree that the photograph, the family archive is central to our lived experiences,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. As an 8-year-old, 9-year-old being photographed, what's an archive? And so then once again, it's kind of I'm trying not to attach something to something that I didn't feel or think in the moment that the photograph was taken, right? Yeah. It's because then at that particular moment, those photographs went back to Jamaica, yeah. I was curious around the paper, yeah, and this thing called an image, right, yeah. So then once again, I push back against how we use certain words to attach it to something, to make sense of something, but in that historical moment, that wasn't it, yeah. And then sometimes it's like when we look back at people from the past or whatever, we might read them as queer, right? Yeah. But the question for me is, how did they identify themselves? Because then I think there's a danger to take current ideas and then just place it onto something because it looks like something, but it might not be. So then I'm kind of always aware of how language is used in the certain kind of work that we do. And some of it I'm like, that's not quite right
Yeah.
from my position.
No, absolutely.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, I think I also want you all to. What do you all think about that? I mean, this idea that Ajama so succinctly placed that at the time of the making of the thing, it's not called that. It's not a historical record. It's not an archival document. It's not a fact. It's not something precious.
No, I'm
but-
actually not saying that.
No. But you're saying that it is at the moment. It's not necessarily archival in the making at that time. For example, when the family is being assembled in front of this photographer,
Yeah.
it's not thought of as such. So I want us to maybe reflect on that. That the idea of either thinking retroactively to images that were taken in the past and thinking of them as important documents, or images that we're taking ourselves, like Clifford, you do, and of course we all do, and then thinking perhaps later, as you said, maybe 5 years later, 10 years later, 15 years later, that this could be something important.
I want to push back up against that. I do think that the family photo album is the archive. especially when thinking about film, right?
Yeah.
We're taking these away, we're taking digital cameras away. The family sitting for a portrait. What is the intention behind that? It's to freeze this moment in time to be able to render visible this memory so that we can revisit it. And so I think the very act of doing that is archival. And not calling a thing does not mean that it's not that thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Clifford, do you have something?
I think everything we do is like important, whether we realize it now or later.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's like having. Let me not say that, but like in my brain, I thought about. Okay, I'm thinking about like I'm thinking about like my junk drawer at home,
Yeah.
which is like a place where things go that don't really have a place.
Mm.
It doesn't mean the things that are in there aren't important, but when I need something, I know where it is and it's in that space. And then over time, it does get a little unorganized. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, like there is a space where I can
Yeah.
go and like
Yeah.
find what it is I need, and the things range from like paperwork
Yeah.
to like a hair clip that I found on the sidewalk, or someone's business card that I met at a function. I don't know. That's just like what came to mind. Just
Can I
now.
clarify something? Well, not to clarify, but I think that we have to also be aware of the history and the language around photography, and then how certain words like memory, evidence, or whatever is attached to a medium that is representational, right? Yeah, so then, once again, I'm questioning
Yes.
the very idea of what the photograph is supposed to be do as captured evidence, the index, memory, or whatever. And so then, once again, I think that we have to have a sense of where some of the language comes from, right? Yeah, and in some cases, that's what I feel needs to be interrogated as well. So basically, I'm saying in that particular moment, right? Yeah, right. I have no idea what these things were, but actually, it doesn't mean that it is not important. It has no value. But I'm saying that I'm not going to say, well, this was the archival moment, because it's in retrospect, and then we have to then be aware of how we look back at things through what lens.
Absolutely.
And then that lens is not a visual lens; it's an emotional lens. So then that's the bit that we kind of always have to always be aware of, that the looking is not just visual, but it's also sensed and experienced, and that then complicates ideas around the archive, the photograph, and memory.
Absolutely. I just want to just maybe also kind of add something to what you're saying. The New York Public Library has a huge photo library called the New York Public Library Photo Collection, which was founded in the 1930s and had a dedicated librarian, etc. It still exists to this day. It's a circulating library, meaning that you can go and actually take photos and then take them out of the library, right, and bring them back. New York Public Library, like all American institutions today, are restructuring due to changing priorities, budget cuts, new leaders in power, etc. Just new protocols. They've decided that they don't want the photo library to circulate. At least many people who are internal to the New York Public Library feel that the library should remain, but it should not circulate. Now, a dispute has emerged in the New York Public Library. Is the photo library archival? Does it have historical specificity? Does it have historical meaning? And some people say it is mere ephemera, meaning that it's not to be studied by historians, it's not to inform our factual or historical research, it is not a research library. It is merely a library for designers and artists who consulted it since the 1930s to produce different kind of artworks, right? So this is the main debate, and the difference between what is considered ephemera and what is considered an archive is very interesting. But it has something to do with what we consider to be historically crucial, important, significant, what we think, what kind of documents we think should be preserved, and what we merit as research, right? So the kind of work that we do as artists sometimes is not treated in that category of the archive. It's treated as ephemera because it's not considered to have the historical specificity or the criteria that merits it to be a document worthy of researching. So I just wanted to share that because I think that in some ways, I just wanted to respond somehow to what you were saying, because I do think you're raising a very important point about how we ourselves as visual artists can actually begin to change that notion by kind of taking it upon ourselves to create an archive, but also how we can, as you said, continue to be careful around the use of specific forms of language.
Yeah. I think a lot of what you're speaking to goes back to the intention behind those who are housing these photographs, right? And framing and how they're being contextualized and categorized enough not to be didactic, but to, again, give some framing to what the material is and the significance of it. It's inherently significant, but we need to give words to that and language to it within these institutions so that it's not just seen as objects in a box that don't mean anything. What I find myself thinking of is what is at risk in the absence of Black queer archives? What can be lost in thinking about evidence in the document? I do find photographs to be proof of existence, right? And so in the absence of images that chronicle our history in a visual way, we can be told things about our history that is not true, right? And so in a lot of ways, I think photographs can contradict falsehoods, you know, can counter histories and narratives, and all of that is important work, but we have to put that energy and effort towards framing it in that way, so that they're not just pieces of paper that have images on them, right?
Yeah, I think if Black queers do archival work and they want these spaces to value them, it's the wrong path, because actually nobody gives me my value, period. So then, once again, there is this danger of thinking that we can only have value for the work because the institution gives that value. That's the wrong way around, yeah? So then, once again, I think that we have to also question, where does the archive live? Right, yeah, right?
Yeah.
And then what kinds of other kind of models can we work with to build archives collectively or whatever? I don't always run to the institution. Now then, with that said, right, yeah, part of the paradox is that the reason why then the Ruckus Archive then went to an institution was because they have the skills to preserve and conserve the work, right? Right? And then because it then sits in London's archive, right, yeah, not the Black Cultural Archive, one that always have issues with funding, not the White Gay Archive, who was so happy that, oh my God, don't start writing the drama. right? And the White Gay Archive was so happy that they had one folder of Black and Asian work over 30 odd years, right? So then we had to then make a choice to where will the archive live, right, yeah? And that's also around when some of our Black queer folks have passed on, right, yeah? Families close ranks, yeah? And then they might see a pile of stuff and throw it away because they don't know what's there. And also, some families know exactly what's there and destroy it. So then that's the tension around they can look after it. And then actually, for me, kind of, that's kind of the tension that we have to think about. Where does it live? Right, yeah, who is better placed to look after it? And then in terms of the Ruckus Archive, it was London's archive because they will never have those challenges around funding, right, yeah? And the oldest item is from 1068. They are safe. So then, once again, I wouldn't put it in a Black archive or queer archive because it's too precarious. And then because then people are then giving us material because they trust us, right? And we have to think about that carefully. So then, once again, we have to question all of that thing around who gives value.
I think before I open it up, thank you, Ajamu. I think before I open it up, I just want to sort of say something about this idea of how the Black Queer Archive lives and who takes care of it. I think all of you who are curators here need to pay attention to this. I'm looking at you, Ade. Yes, I'm looking at you because I think the idea of taking care of an archive for me is also almost just as important as making the archive specifically, right? So what I worry about now is that because artists have already taken on the burden of creating the archive, they also have to take on the burden of looking after it. So where are the curators? And how can we think with artists to proactively kind of share responsibilities? Because it's a lot of work to document your community and at the same time to make meaning of that document and then to preserve it for posterity, right? So anyway, with that said, I don't know if anyone else has something to add before we open up.
Can I add something quickly?
Yeah,
Sorry
sure.
about this. I think, and this is where I've been going for some years, is that the archive can be somewhere that you go to. It might not be, but the Black queer body is the archive. Because then, if we agree in principle that archives hold memories, that then means then the Black queer body is the archive, and then we then get back to archival pleasures, or then the archive is a more sensual and more fleshy, right? Yeah, it's not, and that then moves out of your 19th century dead boxes, yeah. So then once again, I think that we have to find other ways to play with the archive, and then because the archive is sacred, on one level, right? Yeah, right. I think that the beauty of being an artist that creates archives is that you play around with that sacredness, and that's far more interesting for me than this cold, linear way of dealing with this thing called the archive. It's doing something else, right? Yeah. So it's kind of hovering in different kinds of ways. So then actually, that's why I then come back to every part of the Black body, nipples, vaginas, tits, breasts are archives. And that totally subverts what the archive is. And that's what queer does. It flips it and fucks with it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think we all have a responsibility to the archive, in the ways in which we can care for it, and that will look different for all of us, right? And so the expectation isn't that we care for it in the same way, but it's that we extend that care. I think the archive should live in multiple spaces. The archive that I'm building, the physical archive, the photographs, not just my artwork, I don't want that to just live with me, right? Because then we get into access, right? And I started this journey because I didn't have access to these images, but I knew that they existed. And so I feel like my care and my responsibility is to provide access to this history, to not only hold it as source material for work that I will make, but material that can be studied, can be lived with, for our community, right? There are going to be failures with the institutions inherently, right? But that doesn't mean that they should not also exist there, right? We just have to be more intentional,
I agree.
right, about where we place this material, who is put in charge, or not in charge, but in care of these materials, and finding meaningful ways that we can engage with it as artists, but also for the public, right? We can have these conversations amongst ourselves as artists, as practitioners, as museum workers and curators, right, on a very high level, but the general public also deserves to be able to dialogue with this in their own ways, not just through exhibitions, not just through publications, but to be able to go and sit with a photograph. Now, I love the idea of an archive of this material being able to circulate, but I'm concerned. I have preservation concerns about that. I have practical concerns around that. So, come inside, have a seat, scan if you need to, put the gloves on, and sign out when you leave, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Clifford.
I've never looked at an archive. So I think my archive is Tumblr and the circulation of image. I think an example of that is the cover of Conditions, which is a book of poems by Essex Hemphill. I remember seeing that image and was like, wow, beautiful. Hadn't read the book or the poems, but I saw that on Tumblr. And I think a few years later, or like 2 years later, I remade the image with a boy that I worked at a grocery store with. I had him hold up a knife and a peony and did the same pose. And then with that, I was like, okay, like reverberation, like how they remake movies all the time, so that everyone knows Cinderella. There's a story. There's remakes of movies. Like if you remake images, are we passing along the information of, okay, well, this is an image from this book. Like who saw that image that I remade, who now can go research who Essex Hemphill is, and like his like almost like not, I guess like a new resurgence of his work is because of a lot of things, and some of those things are because people are, they're passing along that information because the work that people are making now are talking about that. And so we're just like re-inviting those older works into newer spaces and giving the old work like new eyes and new meaning. So I think that's kind of my. I think I will go to an archive sometime soon because it sounds like a nice, yeah.
Yeah. It's nice.
Well, with that, we'll open it up for discussion. Oh, yeah. Okay. You have to walk to one of the microphones. Sorry. Yeah.
That was great. Alana, I loved what you said about family who were closeted, but who you immediately recognized their own kind of queerness. And it makes me think about my very favorite poem by Essex Hemphill, which is Commitments, and it is about a speaker who is poring over a series of family photographs. And he's looking for a kind of punctum that would reveal his queer subjectivity. And towards the end of the poem, he says something like, I'm the invisible man in the invisible son in the family photographs. I smile as I serve my duty. And that duty, in terms of thinking about the family, is often to sort of represent a kind of heteronormative ideal. And Alana, I'm interested in your work and the way that you're kind of toggling between your own family albums as a kind of entrance for you into the archive, and then what it means to be working with found images, images that have ended up in, the trash, that have not been inherited by other family members, that are sold on eBay. The kind of intimacies that you see in the album are, by blood. There's a kind of propinquity that is very much built into the images themselves. And so I wonder how you kind of cultivate that intimacy and fellow feeling with the subjects that you see in these found images. And if you see that work as building another kind of family album, an alternative family album for queer subjects.
Yeah, I mean, on being able to see someone's queerness, right? What's the first thing that we say? Oh, they family, right? And so while these are found images of people who I've never met before, I find them to exist in this space of like chosen family. People who I'm bringing into my kind of queer ancestral history, right? And so it's different, right? Relationally, but I think spiritually it still has similar ties that I'm engaging with and wanting to kind of sit with and bring forward and offer up to others to be able to experience for themselves as well. I think back to an exhibition, a solo show that I did at Baxter Street Camera Club in 2021, titled Mirages of Dreams Past. And what I really wanted to create within this space was like this Black queer dream space. So I'm thinking back to you, Clifford, around like dreaming and daydreaming and trying to dream up a life for oneself, right? And so I think in dealing with these photographs, these found images, and these memories that are not experiences that I've had, but in ways feel familiar, I'm trying to kind of bring that energy, to conjure that energy so that we can kind of sit and kind of close our eyes and drift back into the past, to kind of travel to a different lifetime, to be able to imagine, or to be able to resurrect, right? So I think I'm moving in between those things and really trying to weave together a collective memory that we can sit with, and have whatever relationship you like with the images, with the artwork that is derived from the images. And the artwork itself, you're rarely ever seeing the full photograph, right? You're seeing a crop, a gesture, a face, the illusion of a face, right? Moments of connection that in ways feel a little elusive, right? Maybe it's not two men kissing, but it's the touch of a brow, the overlapping of the shoulder, this kind of quietude of queerness that is romantic, right? I think there's a lot of romance in friendship. It does not necessarily have to be a partner. But yeah, these are things that I'm just kind of like working through, and it continues to kind of evolve my relationship to it and its output. In the beginning of my work, I was using encaustic to kind of veil over photographs, to obfuscate certain things, to kind of withhold things from the viewer, to kind of protect aspects of the subjects. And now, you know, there's this kind of explosion of visibility of what you can see rather than what I'm holding back. So, yeah, long answer, but things are still loading and evolving. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I loved this presentation. I loved so many of the reflections that all of you offered. And I have a question that I think is mainly for you, Alana, but I welcome responses from anyone. It's about this idea of care that in your discussion, I sense that care in some ways is attached to an idea of family that's holistic and cohesive and healthy and in some ways potentially positive, for lack of a better term. And because I think each of you in different ways spoke about death and grief, I began to think about images of cremation in a way that oftentimes it's common for families to spread ashes at sea and to send them out into the world and to let them go. And knowing what I think we all know about Black queer experience and the moments of trauma that can sometimes be brought about through family betrayal, and wondering about the possibility that maybe some of those images you encounter online is from a queer subject, a Black queer subject, who has decided to relinquish any images of their family, to set them away or set them free as a form of care or as a way of trying to deal with some sense of betrayal.
Yeah.
And in posing that question, I guess I'm wondering, when you encounter images and you project onto them, which I think all photographs invite of some form of projection, do you ever sense or make room for the possibility that maybe those subjects want to be left alone? Like maybe they've lived really, really intense lives, and the last thing they want is to be the basis for someone's projections into the future. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, that's absolutely a possibility that that maybe they want their photographic memory to exist in a quiet space that isn't for the public. Again, that's just something that we can't know. And I guess have accepted the fact that on some level, you know, that has happened. But again, I'm thinking about what is at risk by not having these images visible, right? And this question comes up a lot in different ways, you know. How do you know that these images weren't just, you know, personal and meant to be private? I think about what you shared, Texas Isaiah, about, you know, taking certain photographs and having to pull it from a show, or inherently kind of knowing that this will just exist for that person. So there's always the possibility, you know, that I have maybe overstepped, you know, in that way. And I guess the way that I try to mitigate that is by being gentle with my handling, being gentle with the way that I work with the images, and still leaving a space of protection where you're not seeing the full image, right? And so this memory in ways is kind of cropped. It's kind of cropped in a way where I want to focus on something specific, right? And so it's not to be prescriptive around a person in particular, but rather like, what does this communally represent? And sure, it's possible that someone might not want to be the catalyst for, you know, a community's understanding of its history. But I think I take those missteps, you know, if I've done them on the chin, because I realize for myself how important it is to, you know, see yourself through others, through ancestors, and how that all is baked into your self-making. On family betrayal, like I've experienced that deeply, which is probably why this work is so important to me, to not exist in the dark, why it's so important for me to go into the crevices and excavate things that others have deemed unimportant or should be left alone, or too precious to hold. You know, we should hold precious things and care for them with intentionality. So, yeah. Thank you for that question, though.
We really have 3 minutes left, so.
I have a question that's maybe an extension of that. As somebody who has a will, in it, there is a part where when I'm no longer here, that I have a lot of boundaries around what people get to explore within my private life if they ever do research on me, because those things are mine. And I'm wondering if you have thought about that. Have you thought about your ascendants and who will look after your own archives?
Yeah. Yeah, I think about that a lot. I'm not very close to family. Love my mom down, but we've had such a journey. I was just talking to my partner a couple of days ago, like, you know, if something happens to me, like, and it makes me emotional. But if something happens to me, like, I trust you to care for that which is mine and to share it in ways that make sense, you know? So, like, I feel that deeply. And so I think it's important for us to, like, to communicate what we want and what we need in terms of how we are remembered, and to not take for granted the time that we're here. Life is so precious. I often think about my mortality, as I'm sure many of us do. And so we have to tell people, you know, what we want, because in the absence of telling people what we want, anything can happen, you know? So, yeah, I think about that a lot.
Yeah, anybody else wants to? Do you want to say something, Clifford?
The closest that I think about it, it like sits like in the back of my head. I haven't made any actions toward like a plan. I have a few hard drives. I have one at my mom's house, one with me, and then one at a friend's house. So I've kind of like split up. But I have like all of my negatives just like in folders in my apartment. Yeah, I don't.
I think in terms of my activist work, I kind of know where that will live. But in terms of my photography work and my fine art work, for me, there's a question around who is best placed to look after photography, not just the content, but to look after that, try and look after kind of that kind of work. And I'm still grappling with who is best placed to try and do that, because I might think there isn't a conversation around where artists' work will live when they are no longer here. And the reality is lots of places are not set up to look after black and brown queer work anyway, right? Yeah, right. And then with that, you've got to kind of work out. I think for me, there are some places that would love to have this work, but they haven't done the work to have the work. So then once again, it's that kind of saying, where will it live when I am no longer here? And then the thing that I've done is that some people have got works already, just so that I just know that some key pieces will be with friends and family. Just because I know how the art world also works. When artists are not here neither, they come swooping. So hence, I'm trying to circumvent that, but I'm still grappling with that. But there is a question in terms of what you raised. I think there's a question around what if then black queers then don't want to be archived? And how do we then deal with that part of the archival conversation? And then some things around the black queer experience cannot be archived neither. Yeah, and so then once again there is still these messy areas around the archive that I don't think that we have a public discourse around, because we are still obsessed with being in the archive. But then there's still these things that I think we still have to deal with, or not. But I just think we also have the right not to be archived as well.
Thank you. Also, please give our speakers a round of applause.